Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Our topic today, I find it very interesting, and that is reading between the lines or interpreting the hidden meanings of what people say, a valuable skill. They'll help you navigate your daily life. While you may not always be able to figure out exactly what someone might have meant, you can get a good idea, which is half of the battle. For this topic, we have, like I said, a special guest all the way from Mexico, which I will pass the torch to my colleague Maria to introduce her. Good afternoon, Maria. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, my dear Mona. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing my good friend and colleague for the past at least 20 years. Well, we shouldn't be saying that, right?
I know.
But I'm very happy and proud to introduce Liliana Cantu. She has been a trainer, coach, and facilitator in all things intercultural for the past over 20 years. She is actually the founding president of CTAR Mexico. Now, CTAR, for those who don't know, is the Society for Intercultural Education, Training, and Research, a very important organ that helps interculturalists connect with each other and move forward in the whole science of interculturalism. And she has been pivotal in working with many different companies in all different industries across different ranges, especially in helping expats, helping companies, global companies, understand how to do business in Mexico and vice versa. So it is my pleasure to introduce you, Liliana. And as we start out, I think that the whole theme of reading between the lines is one that's fascinating.
Mhm.
As someone who had to learn how to live and speak in Mexico, I know that I made a bunch of mistakes starting out. And one of the things that many expats, many executives, many people who work and live in Mexico say is, I don't really understand what people mean when they say ahorita or mañana, tomorrow or now in a little bit. Is it a little bit or is it never? So I want to start talking about what that actually means.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mona. Thanks for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be a guest in your program and to be talking about this topic because I do think that it's the topic or one of the main issues that cause intercultural misunderstandings and that don't allow teams or colleagues to really understand each other and work well together. It all has to do with priorities and what's important to each one, as in anything with intercultural interactions. If you understand the other side, and you're assuming difference. I love that phrase of, if you're going to assume anything, assume difference. Don't take anything for granted, particularly with communication. I think you're in a good place to start finding those converging paths. Ahorita. The thing is, and I think here, thank you for starting there, because it's a point that I always made. Don't pay attention to the word because ahorita, exactly, it can have many meanings. What else? What's the situation? What's the relationship between, you and that person? We often talk about, the difference between direct and indirect communication. I like using Edward T. Hall's dimension on better on context, because it's not only the words, high context communication, like Mexico. The message is not only in the words, it's in everything else. It's not only what I say, it's how I say it, the tone of voice, the facial expression, and also the situational context. What happened before, what can happen depending on the situation, and that can give a different meaning to that ahorita. I remember training a group of Mexican couples. They were moving to North Carolina, and we're talking about the ahorita. And I remember one of the spouses saying, "Well, it's different if you say ahorita or ahorita." So just the nonverbal, it's part of that context, that other channel that you pay attention to that, and you add up all that context, you get the right meaning. The meaning is there because, of course, from the more direct, low context perspective, it feels like the person is not being clear, doesn't want to really make the message, doesn't really want to tell you something, or is hiding something. And it's because you're missing, so many channels where you complete that message, and you get the right meaning of the ahorita. And that was a really high context answer, giving a lot of explanation rather than just saying ahorita means this or that, right? So the ahorita, it depends on who it comes from. I know if it comes from my 20-year-old daughter, that means pretty much never. But if it's from my colleague, even Mexican colleague, still, if I want more clarity, ask for more clarity. Oh, can it be before 5 p.m.? And then I have a better idea.
I
Uh,
had one of my clients had said to me, when my colleague in Mexico says ahorita, which literally means
in a bit.
now, but a little now, but you don't know if it means right now or it means in a little while. And that's why it's so, but she said to me, I don't know when somebody says ahorita, if I have time to run to the bathroom or not. And I'm like, you have time to run to the bathroom.
Or you
Plenty of
can ask, right? Or you can ask and say, can I just run to the bathroom? And, uh, but
I
yeah,
just thought that was so funny.
I was training a couple from Sweden, no, Denmark. And she had it very simple. It's like, if it's not clear, ask for clarification, right? But I guess it's this feeling of this person doesn't want to be clear with me, rather than that's more open perspective to communication, where if I need a little more specificity, that person to be more specific, you can just ask. Okay, so ahorita means like 3 p.m. And then there's also the concern of being too direct, right?
Mhm.
Because, for instance, that ahorita like 2 p.m., it would be different if I say ahorita like 2 p.m. or ahorita like 2 p.m. It's just that, of course, I exaggerated a little bit, right? But just that a nonverbal communication, or the tone of voice, the facial expression, is through the high context, sending the message, keeping it very direct. It's still a direct message, that question, but through the context, you're making it, at least for Mexico, culturally appropriate, because you're sending in that channel this message of, I don't want to pressure you. I care about your relationship. I don't want to sound too harsh, but I really need to know if this is going to be 2 p.m., right? So I always say that the context, rather than being like a difference, it can also be a tool to
Mm.
make your direct messages and your direct communication more culturally appropriate. I use it all the time here in Mexico. I think that, like in cultural profiles, I always come up as more direct, but I'm really high context. So I know I can be very specific in when I am asking, but with the nonverbals, with the posture, with the maybe like uh, maybe making a little small introduction to my very specific and direct request, just to ease in and still be direct in the request. It can be a tool to bridge those communication gaps. I don't know what worked for you here in Mexico when you were trying to like get adapted to the communication.
One thing that I'm listening to you, Liliana, and I understand exactly what you're saying, is basically do not rock the boat. It's just do whatever you gotta do. Just don't rock the boat. Just make sure you save face. One of those two criterias. And I grew up in a high context society, still is today, and it always drove me crazy because I said, okay, well, if you're masking what you truly believe or feel, how can I pick that up? But I realized that we can start working as a skill, just like any other that we can work on. And through practice, we can start picking that up very fast. But the question is, when we are able to see the person, we can sense and feel the body language, the tone, the eye contact, and all that. It's quite easier than in written words, because when you are sending a message, whether it through email or text, it can be crucial how it comes through. So to me, every time I am writing something, I am much, much more conscious of what is it that I write, the word that I'm using, and how am I sending it. And possibly if there are emojis attached to that communication. What would you say about that? The written version of non-verbal communication and the face-to-face.
I agree completely. I mean, you're more able to use all these contexts when you're face to face, and all of that is pretty much gone,
Mhm.
unless you find ways to still incorporate it. Right? You were mentioning right now the emojis. What's the, in this case, Mexican, right, or Latin American priority is, I want to know that our relationship is okay. That there's that there's harmony, that we like each other. That, so what can send that message? Maybe a brief but greeting at the beginning, right? So hi, and I hope you had a nice weekend. Or if there was something that I told you last time, hi, and I hope that your daughter started her a trip that you told me about. Great, right, or something like that. That it's like boop, checking the check mark right of, okay, good, we're connected. And then very often with the cultural differences, we tend to go very black and white. Oh, these are direct, these are indirect. But really, within a country, there's gonna be more direct or more indirect people. And even the same person, I know I'm more direct with some people, and I try to soften things and be more gentle with other people, depending on what exactly, on the context, on the relationship, on what the situation, etc., on the trust. To not just put in black and white. No, this person is indirect, is high context, so I have to, you can combine. I mean, you start with the, okay, the relationship check mark, and then go direct, because there's even again also differences even within a country, right? I'm from Monterrey. We're supposed to, or at least generally perceived to be, a little more direct and honest and to the point. So maybe someone from another country, in an effort to be, culturally appropriate, will be will be too indirect, and I might be like, just ask me, no problem. So I would say, like, also, I don't know if the word is gouge, like, feel
Gauge.
thank you. Even from individual to individual, make having these little, like, strategies or measures. I've had participants say, I always make sure I start my email with a greeting, make
Mhm.
sure I say goodbye in a nice way, and then you can also, get to agreements, because closing the cultural gap doesn't necessarily always mean you coming closer to the other side. Can also make suggestions to the other side, because there's going to be a positive outcome for both, right? For me to get a better understanding of what you're asking in an email, it would be great if you use bullets, for instance. That's a tip I always share.
Mm.
Because somehow when we learn to use PowerPoint, and we learn that each bullet has to have an idea. So I think that's a strategy that helps more indirect, high context people ground the ideas.
That
uh,
reminds me, Liliana, what you just said. I remember working with two teams. One was in the US and the other in Mexico. And somebody in the American team said, I find it very strange when I'm having a conversation via Teams chat that my Mexican colleagues will say, Hi, Joe, how are you? And leave it at that. And they're like, Fine, what do you want? And so they would be like frustrated and perplexed that why would their Mexican colleagues just say, Hi, how are you? And wait until the American would answer before making their request.
request. Hmm.
And so one of the things is, remember that it's relationship versus task. So would you like to talk a little bit about why that happens, that the Mexicans don't jump right in before, and just wait
I
to
was
get
listening to you, and I thought, well, why wouldn't I start? For me, it would feel rude. Hi,
eggs.
how are you? Can you send me? Wait, so you're not really interested in how I am. You just want something, right? So don't even ask. you know so, but that's again the relationship oriented. This is more important for me. So it's that, okay, how are you? I'm sending the message. I'm interested in you. Fine, thank you. How are you? Fine, thank you. Say, can you send me? It's, and it's just like sometimes even the natural flow of things. Somebody was telling me, someone from the US was like, why do Mexicans always say sorry? Don't say sorry. But because he's like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, can you, and it's just like automatic. I don't think that we say it in Spanish, but it's just these things that you learn.
Part of the
And
protocol.
yeah, exactly. I remember a German participant once saying, our way to ask or to make requests, because requests can have this risk of sounding too demanding. They will be, they will have this style. And this person was saying, well, my Mexican colleague asks me things like, oh, I'm sorry, could you please send me the report from, and he was even upset. He was like, why does he ask it like that? It's like as if I had the option to say, no, I don't want to send you that. Right? It's my job. Of course I have to send it. So he doesn't need to be so, excuse me, could I ask you for the favor of you sending me? Just ask for the thing, right? But for the Mexican side, it's like it's the correct way to ask for something, because if I just contact you and say, can you please it's from being used to an environment where your priority and the first thing you're paying attention to is feelings and not offending and saving face, as Mona was saying, that would sound too harsh. So it's again not assuming really, and keeping in mind what you know about the other culture. I always tell Mexicans, talking about communication, talking about behaviors in individualism versus collectivism, keep in mind this phrase in your head: it's not personal. It's not personal. They just need that report. If they're not upset at you, there's no problem. It's just, it's not personal. And to have those, I think, tips or mottos or slogans, mantras, right? To keep in mind that your perception of behaviors will always be influenced by your culture, and you need to be paying attention, constant attention on that.
This is why, I mean, I'm listening to to you too, and I'm thinking, I said, well, this is why it's so important. The job that we do or the work we do is extremely important, because I remember attending a webinar of Simon Schneck. Is that what?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
he's well known. And one thing that he mentioned about this, and I think is a matter of disclosing our ways of doing business or communication, whatever, ahead of time to avoid any type of misunderstanding. And he said, okay, if you want to send a message to someone, just be clear and direct right at the get go. Because if you just say, hi, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I was wondering if he said that's just so hypocritical. Just say, hi, this is so so. I'm contacting you because blah, blah, blah. This is why I'm contacting you. And at the end, I hope you're doing well. Let me know if the, so again, these are two different approach from two different environments with two different ways, and knowing ahead of time what we are entering into would be so much helpful. And this is when dialogue and communication come handy.
For
But
sure.
here's the thing, and I'm going to throw in my little 2 cents. The thing is, everything is coming from a different perspective and filter, right? So for what one person is annoying and hypocritical, for another person it might be an essential part of courteous protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And for what my American client was annoying and frustrating to have to wait, again, he's prioritizing the task and the time. And he's like, don't make me waste time answering you and saying I'm fine, how are you? Just get to whatever the heck you need.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the other person's like, wait a minute, how do you, and here comes the trust thing. How do you develop trust? I need to get to know you and see what kind of person you are before I trust you. The other guy's like, hey, I just need for you to get things done and know that you're competent so that I can trust you. And that was a real eye opener for these two groups, let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that, yes, when they walked away, they're like, oh, I get it. That's why I've been having problems here.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Liliana, it's not personal. It's
Yes,
this is the way your mom and dad taught you how to interact with others, and this is what your society has given you as reinforcement. And guess what? Now we have to figure out how other people do it so we don't, trip all over each other. So
exactly. Because you make a really important point, because one would think, well, but these people are different. This has a style, the other one has another style. Each one evaluates the behavior of the other from their style. But you touched on something important. What's important for both of them? Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And we always want the other person to trust us. That's another thing I always tell in programs. Is the thing is that we might be trying to develop trust in a way that we're just like completely off. So that's the value of trying of learning about, what motivates the other, what does trust mean for the other, because it can be very, very simple and automatic and implicit to, oh, you develop trust, you try to get to know the person, and that person trusts you. Relationship oriented cultures, task oriented cultures, it's through the competence, is through saying what you're going to do, delivering, accountability, and that develops the trust that will allow, then, because I always say, of course you can develop personal relationships in task oriented cultures, but it's not the focus, and it's not the priority, and it's not the main point for trust. And same the other way around, right? Of course. Right now that Mona was talking about, what if you are direct, you cannot become indirect, and it's part of the same thing. I always say, well, what do I do if I know I'm not going to be able to come close to the other cultural style? Maybe I'm even if I tried, I cannot become indirect and high context. I think that then the strategies should be, how do I buffer that characteristic that I know that it's very different from my colleague, and that I know that I can't change. And then you can also develop many strategies, kind of like what Mona was saying, right? Like agreeing or disclosing. I always make the suggestion, if you know that you're be perceived as harsh, direct, etc., and you can't become indirect, you can start your conversations pointing that out. Say, I tend to be very direct. I don't want you to think that I'm upset.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for us to be better at what we're doing. But I really wanted to let you know, in case it's something very different from what you're used to.
I
Yeah.
call that the disclaimer method, and it
Ex-
really works
it
because even
does.
if even if nobody comes up and says, "Hey, remember that time you said that you might be a little rude inadvertently because you're more
Mhm.
direct," they won't
Mhm.
say it, but they'll remember it and they won't take it personally. That's why it's a good idea to have that meta talk about how you're going to talk from the very
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
beginning, because
Yeah.
you
Exactly.
establish the expectations, and people are able to see beyond, the very personal,
Yes.
that reaction, that trigger that it might have. You're like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, that's irritating, but I realize that they didn't do it on purpose.
Uh-huh.
just
Yeah.
that's just the way they are. So okay, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a great
Well,
great method.
this kind, whatever we are talking about, and that is reading between the line and asking question, disclosure, disclaimers, whatever we want to call them. I mean, if you think about it, if you sit and think about it, it's a very, very important skill that is not taught to many people, and it's just so vital, especially in today's globalized world, especially if you are trying to tell if someone is being truthful, if they have your best interests at heart, if they really understand what you are telling them, if you are listening intently. I mean, there's so many things involved. What elements should we look for when we trying to read between the line? Because like I said, it is specialized skill that needs to be taught, because sometimes we talk about it randomly and openly, and we say, okay, reading between the line, but it's so difficult because you might fall into false assumptions.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, what are the elements that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I agree that it can be a skill that is not easy to develop from one moment to the other. But very practical tips, like, do not ask questions that can be answered with a yes or a no,
Mm,
because you'll probably get a yes with the words. And if it's a no total, meaning with the context, you realize, no, he hesitated, the tone of voice, and
yeah.
before he did this, and I'm his boss, so maybe he's. doesn't want to lose weight, whatever, you're gonna miss that, right? So if you don't allow that to happen, don't ask questions that can be answered with a yes or no, because you probably get a yes, even if it's a no. Have the other person elaborate, especially when there's something that has the risk for the other person to lose face. Like, did you understand? Did you understand? Of course they're gonna answer yes, because if they answer no, it's like, I'm saying I'm dumb. I
Mhm.
didn't get it, right? And it's so interesting how all of these things are intertwined. It's not only communication isolated. We're already seeing how communication intertwines with, do we focus on the relationship or the task? It intertwines with, are we individualistic or collectivistic, and we're caring for the harmony. But it also intertwines with, yes, the saving face is part of that. But I always point out also, what have we learned in each of our countries about making mistakes, or
Mm.
saying the wrong thing, or asking a very basic question? And even there's differences, because I love to ask a question in the US. What do you learn here since your children at home, at school? Is it okay to make mistakes? Yes, of course, because it's a country that was born in risk orientation. Let's go to the unknown and risk it everything. And of course, you're going to make mistakes, but it's worth it, right? Because you're going
Mm.
to be the first one getting the whatever. Very different from risk avoidant or certainty oriented, or however you want to call it, culture, particularly in Mexico, where if you look at our educational system and collectivism on top of that, don't want to look bad, be the dumb one, right? You don't learn that. You don't learn it's okay to make mistakes. It's a pretty phrase, but in reality, you don't want to make mistakes. Again, if you make a mistake, you're probably going to be, lectured, or there's going to be a consequence, and plus you look bad. Again, you lose face. That impacts communication. Where in any situation where, for instance, that question, right? Did you understand? Well, I'm not gonna say no, right? Because then I'm wrong, I'm dumb, whatever, right? So maybe that would be another important tip. Always pay attention to the face issue of the person, the dignity, the how are they projecting, and if there's risk, then you have to maybe make adjustments. Interpret accordingly, not only the messages that you're giving, but also when you're listening to someone and they're very high context, check maybe if the situation is one where that person is at risk of losing face.
You
Mhm.
mentioned, you alluded a little bit to history, and I always say it's very important to know a little bit of the historical background of different countries, because that's basically like a person's experience, and they tell you a little bit what their behavior is like. And you talked about the pioneering spirit of Americans that are more accepting of risk. Do you think that also in Mexico? I mean, I'm thinking about changes that occurred in Mexican history, starting with conquest, and then losing half the territory, invasions by the French, the revolution. Do you think that that kind of is part of what determines the culture in behaviors, maybe avoiding risk or following certain norms?
Definitely. I think I always say that, and I agree with you. I mean, what has history taught us? What has change brought us? The change in our history has always been pretty dramatic. I think that definitely influences how we see change. Plus, we're a culture that where people are socialized to value a lot tradition and the way we've always done things, and put on top of that a fear of change or making mistake, that things will be very different from one culture to the other. And I always also share that I think that the indirectness in Mexican communication has these two sources. One is definitely the cultural part, the being collectivistic, caring for the relationship. So then, especially when there's hard news, communication can become very indirect. But also on, and I mentioned like what we learn, educational system, even the skills, the communication skills that we develop or not in our educational years impact. Sometimes I know I want to be more direct, and it's not a lack of commitment or desire, it's a lack of skill. And I know I'm very high context, and when I catch myself just going on, and let's land your idea, stop saying what you want to say, right? So but I have had to develop that because I didn't learn it in school.
Mhm.
And I think we're a culture where there's not a lot of emphasis in learning to have assertive, objective communication, make your point. Cantinflas is our hero. I don't know many of you know who Cantinflas is, but Cantinflas was a comedian in Mexico, what, Maria, the years 60s,
In the
70s,
50s, I
50s or
think
60s?
even
Yes.
earlier, like, yeah, 50s and 60s.
Yes. He was like our Charlie Chaplin. A lot
Okay.
of movies, very funny comedian. We love Cantinflas, but he had this main characteristic of having a really indirect, high context. He's not saying anything, but keeps talking, right? And we love him. And from Cantinflas, there's a Mexican word, and all Mexicans know what that means. And it's a verb. It's cantinflar. You look
Uh-huh.
for cantinflar in the dictionary, it means to talk a lot and not say anything.
I see.
So it's a verb. It's not like I'm gonna cantinflar, but you can really notice that it's something that it's very much in the Mexican communication.
Huh.
Whether
Interesting.
it's because we don't want to offend, or it's because we don't have the skills developed in our educational system to be assertive, or we are caring for the whatever. But it's a verb in Mexico.
I
So it
learned a new word now.
new word, yes. So, but I think all of this is just like for me when I started thinking about this, why is it that for people in the US it's so easy to take risks? And I thought, well, of course, because it's a country that was born from the idea of let's take a risk. And same thing the other way around, right? If someone is trying to understand indirect communication from a country like Mexico, you look at the educational system, you look at what's important for Mexicans, you find the connection between collectivism, relationship, and I think that will also help in that what you were asking a while ago, right? How do you develop the skill? I think that more than developing a skill, it's developing the understanding, and then with that perspective, you will be more able to. It's like putting the right glasses on, and then you all of a sudden see a lot of things that you were not seeing before.
Hmm. One thing that as you are talking, and you mentioned a word that is extremely important, I think, in terms of reading between the lines, and that is hierarchy.
Mm.
And how does hierarchy works? How does hierarchy work in reading between the line when you have, let's say, a boss and I don't know, an employee, an entry level employee, as an example? How would that work? I mean, maybe it works in the advantage of the boss, but not so much the entry level employee, as an example. How is that expressed?
Ooh, I think that it's still a constant, that it's still something that's going to influence both roles.
Uh huh.
That part of caring how you give a message, because there could be a negative result either case, right? I sometimes I share that story. We had someone working at home, and she had a brother living in the US, I think, and one month the phone bill came with all of these calls to the US, and it was a big amount, right? Well, had I been someone in the US, you address it directly. You say, this came up, this cannot happen. I'm going to ask you to please don't make calls from the house. If you need something, please ask me. Uh, but for me, and there's hierarchy there, right? It was not easy. I had to think, how am I going to address this so it doesn't happen again, but in a way that she doesn't feel that she's losing so much face that tomorrow she won't be here. She won't come back. And so it took me like half an hour to think, okay, I'm gonna say this and then this and then this, and hopefully she won't feel so like, oh my God, I lost so much face, and not come back. It worked, thankfully, but yes, I had to start like, say, I can't remember, her name was Sophia or something like that, right? The phone bill came. I could immediately see her face. She was like, there were a couple of calls to the US. I want to ask you, is there a problem? Is your brother okay? Like, I care about you. It's not like the money, the bill. No, 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 everything's fine. Okay. Yeah. Well, my husband was a little upset. My husband, not me, right? So my husband was a little upset, but we, can fix this. In the coming weeks, and please let me know when you have to and that's a very indirect way of saying we're going to discount it from your salary in the following weeks, right? But I'm saying it softly. uh, and if you whenever you have to make a call to the US, let me know. Those were the Skype years where you could make phone calls through the computer, and I mean it did cost something, but it was minor. uh, I can set up everything, and you can call your husband. You can call your brother through the computer. Okay, thank you, thank you. And I was like, please come back tomorrow, please. And she came out. She came back the next day, right? So again, maybe someone from a direct communication culture would be listening to me and saying, oh my god, why to get into so much trouble? Just say what you have to say, and that's yes. But that would damage the relationship, and I would lose someone that I don't want to lose. Right? So again, in hierarchy, it's not only one way. You have to also pay attention, or you apply that all of this high context careful relationship, regardless, because it can have an impact regardless.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. Why do I have to go through all this trauma just to deliver a message? Why can't it be such simple?
I know, and and I think it gets to the point where we really need to remember that in cultural characteristics, there's no
Yeah.
right or wrong, or good or bad. Especially, I think with time, with communication, where of course there's a lot of advantages to one side, but high contact communication does have a lot of advantages.
Yeah.
When you're nurturing relationships, when you're sending that message, I care about you, and that's a long term relationship that
Yeah.
you're caring for. When you need a little more detail, a little more context, right? And it's a form of communication that people are very used to and find okay. I remember in a program, a Mexican participant defending high context communication. He said, when I am answering your question with an answer that's a little longer than what maybe you expected, don't cut my answer. If you go like ta, 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 yes or no, it's like if I caught you at the middle of no, and I didn't let you finish your no, and you were left in you know that's not nice. That's my answer. Listen to my answer. And it was a German participant, because it was a multicultural group, that raised a hand, and he said he was like, an eye opener for him. He was like, you know what? Thank you for, because I am that person that says yes or no, right? Uh, and now, and I had never thought how that might feel. I thought you didn't know the answer, or you didn't want to answer. However, if you think on my side, I'm expecting the short answer. So when you start with the story about, oh well, there's gonna be a meeting, and maybe in that meeting they'll, rather than yes, this is gonna happen, or not, it's not gonna happen. Again, I think that either you didn't understand the question, or you don't want to answer. So that's why I cut you. And he shared a good strategy. So why not? That would be a suggestion for the high context to be a little more clear. Why not, instead of going like, oh, I don't know, can this happen tomorrow? Yes or no? Oh, la 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 la. So yes. Why don't you just invert the order and say, yes, here's why. And then, I have my short answer, and I have the patience and the openness to listen to, the explanation and the context, etc. So yeah, I thought that was, I mean, again, that's a suggestion for the high context side. But also, I always tell people that are more direct, feel free to also help the other person ground those ideas. So if there's the la 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 la, okay, so you mean this?
So
Again, high
powerful.
context. I don't want to, sound rude, but just to be clear that I'm understanding you. So you mean this? For me, it helps. It's like, oh yes, thank you. And then, okay, go on. Right? So just to check for understanding. That's another way to kind of like balance, I think, and not, again, I have to listen to all of this and I'm already lost. But just to, and interruptions, take advantage of the fact that interruptions are okay in many high context communication cultures. It's okay to interrupt.
Wow, wonderful. Our time for reading between the line is up. We enjoy the conversation, and the topic is fascinating. Sometimes we really don't think about it, but it's so crucial, especially today, being in globalized world and also being conscious of time as well. We have to exercise patience, we have to understand the other, and there's so many things that we have to be aware of and cognizant about in order for us to succeed in our interaction. Maria, final say for this session.
Remember that it's not just the words, it's the tone and the nonverbal. That'll help you pick up on what's actually being said when you're trying to read between the lines.
All right, excellent. With that, thank you so much to our guest who took from her time to be with us, and say hello to our folks out there in Mexico.
I will.
And thank you for the invaluable information that you shared with us. Until next time, stay well, stay safe, and be global. Thank you so much.
Thank you.